I welcome you all to the module 10 of this course. So, module 10 is about positive psychology interventions in education and classroom teaching. So, we are focusing on how positive psychological principles can be applied in the context of educational setup on classroom teaching and so on. So, this is the third lecture of this module and overall this is lecture number 27. So, today's lecture is titled as self-determination and motivation in classroom teaching. So, we will be looking at the concept of classroom motivation or student motivation, and we will try to understand this whole concept of motivation using a particular theory called as self-determination theory. So, this is what this lecture is all about. Now, before we talk about today's lecture, let me give you a brief recap of the last lecture. So, the last lecture was also part of the same module, and in the last lecture we discussed the certain positive psychology specific intervention that can be applied in the context of school setups or in the positive education, the context of positive education. We discussed in that context more some of the specific interventions which are evidence based. We discussed concepts like how mindfulness can be used in the context of school settings, character strengths in the school settings, resilience in the school settings and positive relationship in the schools. So, we discussed what are the evidences associated with all these interventions in the school context or in the educational context. So, these were things that we discussed in the last lecture. In today's lecture, we will be specifically focusing the concept of self-determination theory, and we will try to understand some of the basic ideas associated with this theory, and by using that theory we will try to understand the concept of motivation, and then we will apply those motivational concept in the context of classroom or educational context. At the end we will also talk about some autonomy supportive teaching in practice. What are the things that we should focus on in terms of support teaching practices where student will be more motivated in that context. So, let us then start today's lecture. So, when we talk about classroom motivation, this is a very important concept because if students are not motivated in a class, then obviously the outcomes are also not going to be great. So, researcher for decades they have established there is a connection between student motivation and their learning effects. So, the more motivated they are, more they will be learning whatever the lessons that are taught in the classroom. When a student is highly motivated, they tend to stay engaged and persist longer in a task or in a lesson and acquire knowledge in a more coherent form, apply their knowledge more often and achieve higher academic performance over the long term. So, this is something very commonsensical also, that if student is more motivated, their outcomes are also going to be better in terms of engagement, in terms of acquiring knowledge, applying knowledge, achievement and so on. So, in many educational institutions across the globe, they focus on how can we increase motivation of the students. So, this is a very big issue and challenging issue also for education system, how to keep student motivated in whatever learning they are going through. For example, focusing on nurturing student joy of learning or intrinsic interest in it is recognized by key educational policy maker as a key factor in enhancing lifelong learning in Singapore schools in recent years. For example, in Singapore schools, one of the main focus that is given is to how to keep students joy of learning, how they will be intrinsically motivated in what they learn. So, this is a very significant issue because without the motivation, the students are not going to learn the kind of things that are taught in the schools. So, this classroom motivation is a very significant topic. So, we will try to address this whole concept of motivation through the lens of this self-determination theory, how self-determination can help us in this direction. So, this self-determination theory is a kind of meta theory which has many sub theories, and we will not go into all the aspects of this theory, but we will be specifically focusing the motivational part to it and its core component of basic psychological need. So, this self-determination theory is at the foundation it is a motivational theory, which was mostly proposed by Ryan and Deci. They have been doing a lot of research in this direction, and this theory says that people have basic psychological needs for autonomy, relatedness and competence. This is one of the fundamental assumption of this theory is that every human being have certain basic psychological needs. As we all have bodily needs, for example, when we feel hungry, we need food for survival. Similarly, every human being have psychological needs, just like body needs certain things for survival. Similarly, survival and flourishing. Similarly, we also need to fulfill certain psychological needs which are like universal according to this theory, and this needs to be fulfilled for leading a life of flourishing life, whatever it is. So, these needs are very important. So, according to this theory, what are these basic psychological needs? They say there are three basic psychological needs. So, one is autonomy, second is relatedness, the third is competence. So, they said these are three basic psychological needs which all human beings actually wants to fulfill them. So, let us understand these three basic needs, why they are called basic psychological needs. So, these basic psychological needs according to this theory, it proposes that understanding motivation and human well-being requires understanding of these basic psychological needs, because these basic psychological needs and their fulfillment is directly connected to human motivation as well as well-being of humans. So, because their fulfillment leads to higher well-being and also it influences our motivation. So, let us see what are these three basic needs. The first one is called autonomy. When we talk about autonomy, it is basically the need to feel free from external constraints on behavior. So, autonomy means you feel more autonomy when there is a less external pressure or constraint on you. So, when you do something out of your own volition, that no one is pressurizing you, there is no external pressure to do something, let us say. So, the more freedom you have from the external constraint, more autonomy you have. So, that is the idea of autonomy, means it is more of sense of freedom and the source of action is coming from within you. So, you are doing it because you have freedom to do something. No? So, out of freedom you are doing something. So, that is an autonomous action. When you do something because of some external pressure or there is a constraint, you have to do it, otherwise there will be some consequences, then your autonomy is less. Then comes competence. The competence is need to feel capable or skilled. So, the more you feel capable or skilled in doing something, more you feel sense of competence. So, sense of competence can be very domain specific also. You may feel very competent in something, you may not feel competent in other things. Human being cannot be competent in everything. So, if in a certain context of the work or situation or social situation, if you feel competent, that means that need for competence is highly fulfilled in that context. The third one is called relatedness. It is about the need to feel connected or involved with others. So, because as we already said that human beings are social animals. So, there is a basic need within all of us to connect, to relate with people, because that is what our social life is all about. So, if you have supportive system, supportive people, there is a sense of a positive connection with other people, then your need for relatedness is fulfilled. Let us look into these three into a little bit more detailed way. So, autonomy is satisfied, the need for autonomy, which according to them is an universal need. Everybody wants autonomy. So, that is why it is called basic psychological need. This autonomy need is satisfied or it is experienced when the individual feels a sense of choice and volition when carrying out an activity. So, whenever you are doing an activity and you have a sense of choice in it, you can decide what to do, you can decide the course of action, there is not much external pressure, then your sense of autonomy is fulfilled or it is satisfied. In contrast, autonomy frustration happens when an individual feels controlled through internal or external pressures. This autonomy satisfaction is constrained, means it is frustrated when you do something because of some pressure. You don't want to do, or you are not like from your choice you are not doing it, but situation is such that you have to do it. So, there is a pressure on you. Either that pressure could be external or internal. Sometimes we are also feel pressure because of guilt or because of something I need to do something. That is also kind of pressure, but it is coming from within you. Then your autonomy need is frustrated. So, that is called autonomy satisfaction. Competence satisfaction occurs when an individual feels effective and capable of achieving desired outcomes. So, whenever they are doing some actions, some activities in a certain domain, and when they feel effective, they are capable in doing, they are skilled and they know what they are doing, and they are able to achieve outcomes in that domains of work, then their competence need is satisfied. They feel competent, they feel happy and so on. When competence is frustrated, the individual feels a sense of failure and doubt about their ability. In a certain situation, when a person experiences failure or they doubt about their ability, then they are in that context their need for competence is frustrated or it is not fulfilled. So, whenever we fail in something, our competence need is frustrated. Relatedness need is satisfied when an individual feels a sense of connectedness with others. When relatedness is frustrated, the individual feels a sense of isolation and loneliness. Whenever in any context you have supportive people, there is a sense of caring relationship or people understands you, support you and so on. In those contexts, your relatedness need is satisfied. On the other hand, when it is not satisfied, you feel sense of isolation, sense of disconnection, sense of loneliness and so on. So, loneliness, isolation, these are the contexts where your need for relatedness is frustrated. So, according to this theory, these are basic psychological needs. So, every human being wants autonomy, every human being wants competence, every human being wants relatedness. That is why they are called basic psychological needs, that everybody wants this, and the more they are fulfilled in different contexts of life, more we feel happy, more we experience well-being and so on. So, this autonomy, competence and relatedness according to this theory are universal psychological needs. That means, people in every culture, every countries, they basically desire these things, and when satisfied, this leads to higher well-being, and when frustrated leads to ill-being. When these needs are frustrated, people experience psychological problems and so on, to the extent they are frustrated. So, these basic psychological needs can be described as the psychological nutriments that facilitate psychological growth, integrity and well-being. That means, these are like nutrition. When they are fulfilled, you experience health, well-being and so on. Like for physical body also, when you take nutrition, your body experiences health and well-being and vitality and so on. For psychological life also, these needs, when they are fulfilled, your mental health, your functioning level, everything increases. So, these needs are also about personal growth or development, not just about deficits that a person tries to reduce or eliminate. People will seek to enhance this continually throughout life. So, people continuously try to satisfy or enhance or satisfy these needs throughout their life. So, this also promotes growth and so on. Now, let us come to the concept of motivation, how these needs are connected to motivation, because our focus is to understand motivation through this theory and then apply it in the context of education and classroom setup. Now, this theory says there are two basic types of motivation or distinguishes two types of motivation. One is called as intrinsic motivation, another is called as extrinsic motivation. So, motivation, there are various ways you can classify motivation. Sometimes motivation is classified based on the intensity, high motivation, low motivation. Motivation can also be divided or classified based on the source, from where it is coming. Is it coming from inside or it is coming from outside? So, based on that, we can classify it as an intrinsic motivation. When the source is inside, it is called extrinsic motivation when the source of the motivation is outside. So, intrinsic motivation refers to doing something because it is inherently interesting and enjoyable. So, whenever you do something which is very interesting and you enjoy doing something, so the source is within you, You are doing because you love to do something. You are doing because you enjoy doing it, not because of any other reason, not to get something out of it. So, then it is called intrinsic motivation. So, whenever you do some kind of actions or work simply because you love to do it, simply because you enjoy it, then you are intrinsically motivated at that task. On the other hand, extrinsic motivation is about doing something because it leads to a separable external outcome. Whenever you do something to get some separable outcome out of it, let us say you do something to earn money. So, that is an example of extrinsic motivation. So, your motivation is something outside. I am doing it that because it leads to earning money, then it is called extrinsic motivation. So, that is the basic difference between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. In case of extrinsic motivation, the focus is on some external outcome that you will get out of doing it. So, it could be, let us say, getting praise of somebody, getting money after doing something, whatever it is. So, there can be many external outcomes. So, those are called extrinsic motivation. So, when a person does something under the intrinsic motivation as compared to, let us say, extrinsic motivation, the outcomes may be very different. So, over the decades of research shows that quality of experience and performance can vary, can be very different when one is behaving for intrinsic versus extrinsic reasons. So, when people are doing extrinsically motivated task and when they are doing intrinsically motivated task, the experience can be very different and the motivation level also can be different, outcome can also be very different, simply because the source of motivation is different. So, in general we understand that intrinsic motivation is when you are intrinsically motivated, no one else need to motivate you, you are automatically motivated because you enjoy doing that. So, your engagement, your performance, everything will be much better. In case of extrinsic motivation, you can also perform better, but again the source is outside. So, experience and outcome may not be same as intrinsic motivation. So, we will see how it can influence our outcomes and performance. So, let us look into the concept of intrinsic motivation first and then we will talk about extrinsic motivation. So, as we have already discussed, intrinsic motivation is defined as doing an activity for its inherent satisfaction rather than some separable outcomes. So, the focus is on inherent satisfaction rather than some separable consequence. You are doing it simply because there is an inner satisfaction, enjoyment in doing something. So, most of the hobby related things that we do, for example, some people just spend some time whenever out of their work, people have hobbies like painting or let us say going for trekking or something, lot of this, because people do such activities or lot of hobby related activities not because they are not getting anything extra out of it, they do it because they enjoy doing it. So, these are examples of intrinsically motivated actions or tasks. When intrinsically motivated, a person is moved to act for the fun and challenges rather than external pressures and rewards. So, people are motivated because it is a fun doing it, there is an enjoyment doing it, sometimes the challenge also attracts, it is something challenging, I need to check it out. So, then it is intrinsically motivated. Now, people are intrinsically motivated for some activities and not others, and not everyone is intrinsically motivated for any particular task. Now, this is a very subjective thing, some people may be intrinsically motivated in something, some people may be something else, everybody cannot be intrinsically motivated in the same thing, because people differ in their mindset, their interest and so on. So, research has shown there are many benefits of intrinsic motivation. Intrinsically motivated people show more engagement, sustained effort, achievement, positive self-esteem, well-being and so on. So, research generally shows intrinsically motivated, the more we do intrinsically motivated tasks, the more we experience positive outcomes like more engagement, sustained efforts, achievement, positive self-esteem and so on. Now, the research indicates that especially the self-determination theory proposes that this intrinsic motivation is very strongly connected to basic psychological need fulfillment. So, we have discussed basic psychological needs in the beginning. Now, let us connect these basic psychological needs with this motivation. How it is connected to motivation? We have already connected it to the well-being concept. Now, let us see how these basic psychological needs are connected to motivation. Now, this theory says, self-determination theory says, this fulfilling of these basic psychological needs in any context, wherever you are doing something in that context, if these needs are fulfilled, you are more likely to be intrinsically motivated. So, the more these basic psychological needs are fulfilled, more you are likely to be intrinsically motivated. So, when these needs are met, individuals engage in activities because they find them inherently enjoyable and satisfying. So, now let us see this by an example, how this need satisfaction is connected to motivation, particularly how it leads to more intrinsic motivation. Let us give an example of a child learning to play piano, let us say. So, this is let us say situation. A child is asked to learn to play a piano. Let us say parents just takes a child to a teacher to teach him about a piano lessons and so. So, the task is to learn piano. Now, in this situation, these three basic psychological needs may be fulfilled or it may be frustrated. So, let us see both the scenarios. Let us say first autonomy. Now, autonomy will be supported in this case of child learning a piano. How it is supported or how it is unsupported? So, it will be unsupported when parents let us say force the child to practice daily with strict rules. Okay. Now, child has no freedom, child has no choice in it. Let us say parents or whoever the teacher involved in it forces the child to practice it daily with strict rules. Child cannot change those rules and cannot change the schedule and so on. Then in this case what is happening? The need for autonomy that everybody wants is not supported here, is frustrated here. So, what will be the effect? The child will feel pressured and lose interest. So, their intrinsic motivation will decrease. Child is doing because of pressure, not because the child wants to do it. Okay. On the other hand, let us say in this situation how autonomy can be supported. Let us say the parents allow the child to choose songs they enjoy and decide when to practice. Okay. Child has a choice and say in it which type of songs to play on what time to practice and so on. Let us say some freedom, some space is given to the child and they are allowed to choose things in terms of how to practice and so on, when to practice and so on. So, what is happening here? The autonomy is supported more. The child is feeling more autonomous, more autonomy in this case. What will be the effect? The child will play piano because then they will have more enjoyment, more sense of responsibility because they are choosing what to do and when to do, not because of just pressure here, because there is pressure is much less here. The child has more freedom. So, child will be more interested to do it. So, there will be more intrinsic motivation. So, this clearly shows autonomy support can increase intrinsic motivation. So, this is how the first need is connected to intrinsic motivation, that how supporting needs can lead to higher intrinsic motivation. Now, let us take the second need, competence. In this same case, competence will be frustrated for the child in this scenario when or unsupported when the teacher, if the let us say the teacher or the parents criticize the mistakes harshly, making the child feel incapable. Let us say child does some mistakes and so on, and the parent or whatever the teacher, whoever is teaching the piano, they or silly or little mistakes, they start criticizing the child very harshly. So, what will happen? The child will feel incapable, child will feel I am not able to do it, I am not good enough. So, what is happening here? Sense of competence is going down, the need for competence is frustrated here. What will be the effect? The child would try to avoid practicing due to fear of failure, because every mistake is like said that you are not able to do it or whatever it is. So, child will get this indication that I will fail in this task and they will try to avoid it. So, this is how competence frustration can decrease intrinsic motivation. On the other hand, let us say how competence is supported. Let us say when the teacher provides constructive feedback, when a mistake one can make mistake, but the teacher is not very harsh, they give constructive feedback that okay, you have done this mistake, do it like that, practice is like that, and the break lessons into achievable steps. So, the child is able to achieve those steps. So, the small steps are given according to the capacity of the child. Then what will happen? The child will feel capable. So, what will be the effect? The child feels progress and enjoys the challenge, boosting intrinsic motivation. The child will feel much that I am able to do it, small steps. When they are able to do it, they will feel sense of competence, and the competence will increase their intrinsic motivation. They will be more likely to engage in the practice. The third is the need for relatedness, which is about connection and belongingness. Now, in this case, let us say how this whole need for relatedness will be unsupported or frustrated. Let us say when the child practices alone with no encouragement from family and peers, no one is supporting it, no one is encouraging the child. Teacher is also very, like, let us say, not really encouraging. So, what is happening? The child is not feeling the sense of support or love and care from another person. What will happen? The effect will be they will feel isolated and lose motivation. The child will lose motivation. On the other hand, this relatedness need, how it can be supported? Let us say the family listens appreciably, teacher also listens and appreciates, and the child joins a peer group that shares musical interest. So, the child also practices with other students, and they grow together, and there is a support system from the peer group, from the teachers, from the family. So, child will feel supported, and this need for relatedness will increase in this case, or it will be satisfied. What will be the effect? The child will feel valued and motivation to play for joy and social connection. So, they will be highly motivated to practice and grow in that direction, simply because there is a support system available. So, their intrinsic motivation will increase. So, this is an example how this basic psychological needs, when fulfilled, leads to higher intrinsic motivation. So, this is how we can connect motivation with the basic psychological needs. Now, is intrinsic motivation is a rare thing? Yes, to some extent, because most of the things that we do in our life are extrinsically motivated, which is fine. There is nothing wrong with that. Very few activities people are actually intrinsically motivated. Most of the things that we do are extrinsically motivated. We do them because there is a pressure, there is some kind of reward or something we want to get out of it, which is fine, because that is how the society is structured. So, although intrinsic motivation is very clearly very kind of better aspects of motivation in terms of engagement performance, but most of the activities that we do in our life are, strictly speaking, not intrinsically motivated. So, intrinsically motivation becomes rare, especially after early childhood. A child, if you look at a child, when a child takes birth, and after some time the child learns to move and so on, most of the things that a child does is intrinsically motivated. Child will only do that whatever they like to do it, because there is not much external pressure in terms. Obviously, the parents will set certain boundaries, but child loves to play and do whatever, go here and there. So, if you see a child behavior, every actions of the child is intrinsically motivated, because still there is not much external foundation to them. As the freedom to be intrinsically motivated becomes increasingly curtailed by social demands and role that require individual to assume responsibility for non-intrinsically tasks. So, as the child grows, social demands, social roles, demands, everything comes into the picture. Now, they have to do lot of things, not because they want to do it, but because there is a social demand for these things. So, let us say the child grows, they need to go to school, they need to do so many things, so many expectations, so many social demands comes in the picture. So, intrinsic motivation slowly decreases and extrinsic motivation increases. So, research also shows, for example, in schools, it appears that intrinsic motivation becomes weaker with each advancing grade. As the child goes to higher classes, their intrinsic motivation actually decreases. So, the pure self-determined or intrinsic motivation may be an ideal thing for, let us say, in the context of school, in the context of any other setup, workplace also, for teacher and student, but in reality that may not be the case. Most of the people are not intrinsically motivated for a lot of activities. So, most of the students in the because we are talking about classroom context, Most of the students are not intrinsically motivated in studies. So, how can we address this aspect? But that is the reality, you cannot forcefully change it. Most of the students are not intrinsically motivated, but it is not wrong. There is nothing wrong with that, because we need to address this extrinsic motivation also. So, there is nothing wrong in getting extrinsically motivated also. So, to address this motivational issue of student is a complex phenomena. Obviously, every human being have so many things that motivation works out in so many different ways. So, the phenomena is very complex. Self-determination theory proposes that a mix of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation is the best way to deal with motivational issues. You cannot just expect everybody to be intrinsically motivated in every situation, which cannot be the case. So, there is a mix of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation can address a lot of these motivational issues. So, self-determination theory recognizes that this reality by suggesting that intrinsicness of motivation is a matter of degree. So, when you talk about intrinsic motivation, not every motivation, or when you talk about extrinsic motivation, so there is a degree in it. So, extrinsic motivation, all extrinsic motivation is not equally extrinsic. Some extrinsic motivations are, a lot of it is actually intrinsic, some of it too extrinsic. So, intrinsicness of a motivation is a matter of degree. Not every task is equally intrinsically motivated or equally extrinsically motivated. So, we will look into this aspect, and by that we can actually address lot of these motivational issues. As most of the human behavior is extrinsically motivated, it is essential to understand the dimensions of extrinsic motivation. So, since most of the activities are actually extrinsically motivated, it is very important to understand this extrinsic motivation, because this is where we can address issues. Intrinsic motivation is very rare, and most of the activities people are not intrinsically motivated. So, the large chunk of actions that we do actually comes under extrinsic motivation. So, this is where we need to understand more, and this is where we can have an intervention also. So, let us look at extrinsic motivation in little bit more detailed way. So, as we already said, extrinsic motivation is when we do something for some separable outcomes, or you are doing it because there is some external reasons for it. You are doing it because you want to get say reward, you want to get some praise, you want to get money, whatever it is. So, there is an external separate outcome that you want out of it. So, then it becomes an extrinsic motivation. Self-determination theory proposed that extrinsic motivation actually varies greatly in the degree to which they are extrinsic. So, we do hundreds of activities, and all these activities may be extrinsically motivated, but still they are all not same. Some may be highly extrinsic, some may be little bit extrinsic, some of it may be some kind of internal motivation may be also there, some external motivation combination may be there. So, there is a lot of degrees associated with the extrinsic motivation. So, when we talk about extrinsic motivation, all actions cannot be in the same boat or same category. So, there is a gradation of motivation when we talk about extrinsic motivation. So, this is very important to understand, because that is where we can address lot of issues. So, let us look at these categories of extrinsic motivation. So, this is actually diagram that shows the different categories of motivation, from extreme end of A motivation, where there is no motivation, to extrinsic motivation to intrinsic motivation. So, there is a movement from left to right, and as we are moving from this side to that side, motivation is becoming from A motivation to extrinsic motivation to intrinsic motivation, means the intrinsicness of motivation is increasing as we move from here to here. So, we will talk about each of them. So, if you see here, extrinsic motivation is not one thing. So, there are 4 categories under this. Now, what are these 4 categories? So, if you look at here, so here if you see at the extreme A motivation, that means this is a situation where a person is not at all motivated. Okay. So, let us say, so at the extreme end we have something called as A motivation. So, in this case, when we talk about A motivation, means there is no motivation at all. So, there may be situations where the person is not at all motivated for doing the task, whether you give pressure, whether you show greed, nothing will work. So, that means there is no motivation, 0% motivation. Okay? So, this is a scenario where which you can term it as an amotivation. Now, then comes extrinsic motivation. Now, this extrinsic motivation according to this theory is not one thing, there are so many categories under it. So, they actually specifically talked about 4 categories. So, these 4 categories what we have shown it in this diagram. So, one is called external regulation, another is called introjection, identification and then integration. Let us see what are these 4 categories. So, the first one is external regulation. Now, this is a typical case of extreme case of extrinsic motivation. So, here the person will only do a task when it is like there is a very strong pressure or there is a greed for reward is very strong, only then the person will do the task. We will give examples also later. Let us just understand these categories. Okay. So, external motivation, external regulation is that category where it is extremely external, means the motivation there is no intrinsic motivation at all. Person will only do when you pressurize them and force them to do something. So, that is the case of external regulation. Okay. So, the action is guided by strong external forces. Okay. Then comes something called as introjection. Now, in this case there is a concept called ego involvement. In introjection, the person is little better positioned than the external regulation. Here little bit of internalization has happened. Now, it is not completely external. What is happening here? The person is doing an action because there is an ego involvement. What is ego involvement? Ego involvement means the person will do a task because of, let us say, shame, guilt. Sometimes we do lot of actions because to avoid shame or avoid guilt. So, somebody may do a task because if they do not do it, they will experience shame or guilt. They will feel like what others will tell, I am not able to do this task. So, that is called introjection. Now, it is not you do not need too much pressure in this case because there is some kind of internal sense is also there. I need to do because otherwise I will experience shame or guilt. So, there is a sense of ego involvement. So, actions are guided by ego involvement in this case. Then comes something called as identification. Now, in this case it is become little bit more internalized, little bit more intrinsic. So, in identification actions are guided by conscious choice and valuing, conscious valuing of the actions. So, the person values and identifies the values in action. Now, the person does an action, although it is still extrinsic, the person wants to get something out of it, but the person will be much more motivated in case of identification because the person sees the values of doing it. If a student sees there is a value of study, why study is important? Because study can give you, degrees and jobs and so on. So, identifies the values in the action. Now, the motivation will be much internalized. Okay, it is not completely extrinsic. So, in this case the motivation will be much higher because the person sees the values in doing it. So, that is called identification. Still it is extrinsic motivation, but the degrees are different, internalization degrees are different here. The last one is called integration. In this case, it is little bit more internalized here. So, integration, any action which is can be categorized under integration are those actions where when certain actions or concepts or ideas are like integrated in your self concept. So, actions are guided here by the self concept. So, that action becomes almost part of your own self. So, you are doing it, obviously still there is a sense of extrinsicness here, because you want to get something out of it, but the action is so important that you kind of internalize it to the extent that it becomes part of your own sense of self. So, we will give some examples also later. For example, a student, when they feel that getting educated or this concept of education is a part of my self concept, I am an educated person, So, education is so important that it is a part of my self concept. Still, out of this education you may be thinking of getting a job or money, whatever it is, but integration is very much close to your own sense of self. When you do something, some actions, some tasks which are almost part of yourself, then it is called integration. So, if you see from here to here, from external regulation to integration, the intrinsicness is much higher in this case. So, intrinsic motivation, integration is almost similar to intrinsic motivation, although it is still categorized under extrinsic motivation, but the quality and performance, everything will be almost same as intrinsic motivation. So, that is why it is called as integration, and after integration comes intrinsic motivation. That is a separate category, not extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is purely intrinsic. There is no extrinsic interest or separate outcome of our expectations. So, this is the different categories of motivation, which can start from a motivation or zero motivation to very external to somewhat external to little bit internal to very much internal to extreme case of intrinsic motivation, where you do not have any expectation to get anything out of it, purely intrinsic motivation. So, these are all different categories. So, when you talk about extrinsic motivation, it is not one thing. In some cases of extrinsic motivation, it may be external regulation, in some cases it may be introduction, in some actions it may be identification, some actions it may be integration. So, let us give more examples here. So, for example, we talked about a motivation where there is no motivation. So, the person lacks the intention to take any action regardless of pressure or intensity. How much pressure you give, how much incentive, the person is still not motivated. So, that is the case of a motivation. Example will be here, a student completes no work even when pressured or when incentives are offered. For let us say case of a student, the teacher whatever pressure or punishment they give, still the student does not do the work. So, that is the case of a motivation, there is no motivation at all. Then comes the first category of extrinsic motivation, here it becomes the extrinsic motivation here. These are all categories of extrinsic motivation. The first one is external regulation, as we discussed. This is very external to person. So, here actions are regulated only by outside pressures and incentive and controls. Example, student completes assignment only if reminded explicitly of the incentive and grades. So, in this case student does the work, but only when there is a fear of punishment or there is a greed for reward is very strong, then only the student will do. So, this is a case of external regulation. Then comes introjection, again it is a part of, these are extrinsic motivation. Introjection, here specific actions are regulated internally to some extent, but without reflection or connection to personal needs. So, for example, what is happening here? We said here ego involvement is there. Here student completes assignment independently, but only because of fear of shaming self or because of guilt about consequences. So, the student does here not because that student is motivated here too much, but because he feels if I do not do it, I may feel shame in front of other students or in front of the teacher, like this. So, that is, there is a sense of ego involvement here. Then comes identification, which is much more internalized here. So, here actions are recognized by individuals as important and valuable as a means for more valued goals. So, you feel that actions are important, significant for my life and for my career. So, you do that task. For example, the student generally completes school work independently, but only because its value on gaining admission into college. So, the student has some other goals, because they identified if I do not do well or do good marks, I will not be able to get admission to other colleges or may not get good job and so on. So, the student does the work. So, that is called identification. The last one is, which is very internalized, almost similar to intrinsic motivation, but still it is an extrinsic motivation. This is also extrinsic, this is also extrinsic. So, this is called integration. Here actions adopted by individuals are integral to their self concept and the person measure personal values. So, it is a part of one's self concept. For example, the student generally completes schoolwork independently because being well educated is a part of the student concept of himself. So, the student cannot think of himself as not educated. So, education becomes part of the concept of self. So, the student does the work. So, that is called integration. So, these are 4 categories of extrinsic motivation. If you see the last two, identification and integration, they are much more internalized, very much more closer to intrinsic motivation. And the last one is pure intrinsic motivation, where there is no aspect of extrinsicness. For example, the student enjoys every topic, concept and assignment that every teacher assigns and completes schoolwork solely because of the enjoyment. For example, some student enjoys, let us say, mathematics. So, they simply enjoy it and they does the work whenever given because they enjoy doing maths and so on. So, that will be case of pure intrinsic motivation. So, these are different categories of motivational categories which can influence us. So, if you see in this whole categorization, so extrinsic motivation is not one thing. Some extrinsic motivation are actually very close to intrinsic motivation. So, especially the identification and integration, these are more autonomous and internalized forms of extrinsic motivation. So, these are very close to intrinsic motivation. So, since we do most of the actions under the category of extrinsic motivation, so if you can make our action in the category of identification and integration, the result will be almost same as intrinsic motivation. So, there is no harm in doing things under extrinsic motivation, but if you can internalize those extrinsic motivation, then the motivation will be much higher and you may need less external pressure to do it. So, there is a clear significance of this autonomous or internalized form of extrinsic motivation, because their outcomes can be very similar to intrinsic motivation. So, given the clear significance of internalization of extrinsic motivation, the critical applied issue concerned, how can we promote this? Since we do most of the things under extrinsic motivation, so can we promote this internalization of extrinsic motivation like identification and integration category? So, that is a very important applied question. So, if a student can work under identification or integration also, that is also good enough, or it will be almost close to intrinsic motivation. So, can we promote that? So, this theory says yes. Again, this theory says this internalization can be done by basic psychological need fulfillment. Just as we have given examples earlier, how this psychological need fulfillment increases intrinsic motivation, the same case is here. So, whatever we are doing, even extrinsically motivated task, if these basic psychological needs are fulfilled, we will internalize them more, they will become more intrinsic, and we have already given a very clear examples using a child learning piano. So, that is the applied implications. So, to promote internalization of extrinsic motivation or intrinsic motivation, the key factor in this theory says that try to provide a situation or an environment where these basic psychological needs are fulfilled to larger extent, and to that extent they will be more internalized. So, what is the implication for educator and teachers of all these concepts? So, it is very evident that fulfillment of the basic psychological needs like autonomy, competence and relatedness promotes both intrinsic motivation and internalization of extrinsic motivation, and both are equally good enough, So, there is no harm in doing things for extrinsic motivation, but if you can internalize them more, your motivation level will be much higher, your outcomes will be much better, your engagement will be much better. So, therefore, educators and teachers can focus on promoting classroom motivation by facilitating the basic psychological need fulfillment in the classroom setting. So, what is the takeaway from this theory is that if you can facilitate this basic psychological need fulfillment in the classroom context, the student will be much more intrinsically motivated, much more will be closer to those internalized forms of extrinsic motivation or intrinsic motivation. So, that is how we can promote intrinsic motivation or internalized form of extrinsic motivation in the classroom context by fulfilling to large extent these basic psychological needs. How can that be done? How can we support these basic psychological needs? some general suggestion can be given. Obviously, classroom to classroom things may vary, but some general suggestion. For example, how can we support need for relatedness in the classroom context? These are some of the suggestions. One thing is build positive teacher student relationship. So, the more positive relationship is with the student with the teacher, the more they will internalize lessons and so on. They will be more motivated to learn. So, it includes teachers' behavior such as expressing affection, devoting time, resources, willingness to help and non-competitive learning structure. So, if these ingredients are there and there is a positive relationship with the teacher, the students are more likely to learn, because their need for relatedness will be fulfilled in this context. Teachers can also foster a classroom climate of respect, trust and care where every student feels valued and included. So, if in the classroom situation every student feels they are given attention, they are valued, they are included, then they will be more motivated to learn. Teachers also can create opportunities for collaboration, group work, community building activities. So, the more students also work in a group setup or in a group with the peer collaboration and so on, the more they will be motivated also. If the teachers show genuine interest in students' lives and well-being, making them feel connected in the school community. So, if teacher shows genuine interest in the lives of students, even beyond let us say classroom context and so on, for their well-being and let us say everything, so they will feel more connected and this will increase their motivation to learn from that teacher. So, supporting relatedness can be done like this by building a positive teacher-student relationship and overall the atmosphere of the classroom and so on. How can we support autonomy in the classroom context? Autonomy means basically choice and freedom. So, obviously, autonomy cannot be in a bluntly cannot be given all the choices to the student. There needs to be some boundary, but within that boundary a student can be given more choices to increase autonomy. So, it can include encouraging student to choose and voice in learning activities, allowing them to pursue interest and express interest. So, within whatever boundary that is there, obviously everything cannot be given to the student's choice, but within whatever it is, let us say giving assignment and so on, student can have some choice, let us say out of these 5 topics what they can choose and so on. So, wherever possible giving them more choices or more voice in their activities, then that will increase their autonomy and they will be more interested in doing it. Acknowledging students' feelings, perspectives and experiences, showing empathy and understanding. So, more we understand the perspective of the students, what they want, what kind of learning and what kind of things that are expected by the student. So, that will also increase more autonomy in their experiences. Providing meaningful rationales for tasks and rules, helping student understand the value and relevance of what they do. So, for autonomy support, one of the important thing is that one student should understand why they are learning something, why they are doing something. So, the more we give rationales and reasons why this particular topic is important, what is its significance, the student will be more interested in learning that if they understand the value of it. So, that will they will be more autonomically engaged in that task. Avoid controlling language and minimize use of extrinsic reward or punishment which can undermine intrinsic motivation. So, avoid languages like you have to do it, like those kind of thing, putting direct pressure on something using that kind of language, or too much of giving external reasons for doing it, like if you do it you will get this reward, that reward. Those can actually decrease intrinsic motivation. Then the student will only link their action with the reward that they are getting. So, how you talk to students, what kind of language, what kind of reward punishment you give, that can also influence. The last one is supporting competence, how student sense of competence is very important. To build competence, teachers can set optimal challenges that are neither too easy nor too difficult, enabling student to experience success. So, the more challenging situations or tasks given to the student, the more they will feel competent, because if a task is too easy, obviously it depends on the kind of subject and lot of things will determine, but within that context, wherever possible, set optimal challenges to the student. So, when things are too easy, there is no sense of competence needed. No, it's too easy, anybody can do. If it is too difficult, people will not be able to do it. So, challenging tasks are those if the student are able to complete that task, they will feel competent. I have done something, I have to stretch my capacities. So, giving optimal challenges also enhances competence, offering clear structure, guidance and expectation, so student know what is required to succeed. So, if the students are very clear what is needed, what kind of expectations, everything if it is clearly given to the student, that they will be able to know what to do and feel capable in doing it, or in that context they will have clarity in their mind. So, give timely, specific and constructive feedback, that is very important. If a student may fail or student may succeed, whatever it is, constructive feedback is very important. They will understand where they have done wrong. So, that constructive feedback help them to recognize their progress and what more needs to be done. So, that also feels like I can do it, this is what I need to do it, this is more I need to do it. So, that sense of competence also increases. Teach and reinforce self-regulated learning strategies, empowering student to set goals, monitor progress, reflect on outcomes. So, basically helping students to teach regulated learning strategies, step by step learning, empowering student to set goals and so on. All this they will feel more sense of competence in all these activities. So, this is how in the classroom context basic needs can be fulfilled or supported, that will increase intrinsic motivation or internalization of extrinsic motivation. Now, I will just give you one example how autonomy supportive teaching can be done in practice. So, when actually a lecture or some lessons are taught in a classroom. So, autonomy support, we have already discussed some general principles. Here more specific things we will be looking at it. Giving one example of one basic needs which is very important is called autonomy. How it can be used in a practical setup. So, autonomy supportive teaching encourages student motivation by fostering a sense of choice, relevance and personal connection. So, basically autonomy supportive we are talking about, it is more of a teaching practice where all these needs are fulfilled. More specifically autonomy, because it plays very important role. So, key instructional behavior that is required for autonomy supportive teaching. One is take students' perspective. See lessons through their eyes. Do not just teach something because you understand in a certain ways. Try to understand how students are looking at it. What is their perspective? Are they understanding it, or do you need to change it according to their perspective? So, that is very important. Second is vitalize inner motivation. Connect learning to students' interests. So, wherever possible, obviously it may not be possible in every cases, wherever possible, connect things with the student interest. Then provide explanatory rationale, explain why task matters. So, that is very important. Students should understand why this lesson is important, why they should learn it. If they do not have this answer, they will not be interested. If you can make them understand why this lesson is important, what is its relevance in their life, then they will be more interested in that task. Acknowledge negative feeling. Sometimes student may feel frustrated, they may experience low mood and so on. Understand this can happen, accept these emotions and support them. Use non-pressuring language, offer choices not commands. Too much of commanding and pressurizing language actually decreases motivation. Display patience, this is very important, allow time to self-directed learning. While this kind of practices, obviously you need to be very patient, it cannot happen overnight in one lecture. Things may take time, and the different students have different levels. So, patience is very important. So, just to give more specific example, when we give an instruction or teach a lesson, there are three important time period in that lesson. One is pre-lesson, before you teach a lesson, so pre-lesson time, what should be done. Then lesson, when the lesson begins, what should be done, and during the lesson, what should be done. So, these three important stages or critical moments of instructions, how that can be done. So, during pre-lesson reflection, it is more important that teacher should focus on perspective taking. Teacher should ask, will student find this interesting? Will they be able to understand? How can I make it more relevant to them? So, these are the questions that a teacher should ask before starting a lesson. So, this is a pre-lesson reflection that is important. Use past experience and feedback of the student. Whatever past feedback you have got, if you have been teaching this same lesson again and again. So, you might get some student feedback also, your experiences of the past, use them to modify your teaching. How do you teach that? So, that is called pre-lesson reflection. When the lesson begins, what should be done? Help student form a genuine intention to participate. So, start with the background, so the students get genuine intention to actually participate in the lesson. If an activity seems uninteresting, provide clear rationale explaining its value. For example, practicing this math skill will help you manage budget in real life. So, relate them with their life, real life relevance, why this lesson is important. So, that will make them more engaged in the lesson. So, when the lesson begins, gives this background and relevance of the lesson. When you teach the lesson, you need to handle challenges. When students face disengagement, misbehavior, poor performance, acknowledge these negative emotions. This can happen to some students where they may feel negative emotion, they may feel frustrated. Use non-controlling language, like you can try this way or that way instead of do it now. So, that will also help them to try more, and be patient during the lesson. Allow student to process struggling without pressure, because there will be different students, different categories of students, some will struggle, one has to be very patient. So, these are things that can be focused in the different stages of lesson to increase motivation or understand student perspective. So, what is the conclusion? All this self-determination theory can work because they are based on proper research and conceptual understanding. All these things will reduce student resistance by validating their feelings, increase engagement by making learning personally meaningful, strengthen teacher-student relationship through empathy and respect. So, all applying these strategies, teacher helps student learn willingly. So, their more intrinsic interest actually increases. So, this is how self-determination theory can help us to understand motivation in general, and more specifically we can apply those understanding in the classroom context. So, with this I stop here. So, these are some of the specific applications of positive psychology in the context of education and classroom teaching. So, with this I stop here. Thank you.